RevenueCat was one of the first dev tools that made me realize how transformative they can be for startups. I was working at a mobile app and we used RevenueCat for managing in-app subscriptions, and it helped us move much faster. And honestly, we would have been really screwed if it had disappeared overnight.
For people ideating on like new dev tools, any problem in computer science or computers or whatever that seems at the outside it should be simple, but it's not, is a really good opportunity because it actually brings kind of a lot of shame when a developer can't do it, right? You know, they've heard the horror stories and they know like, okay, we can just click and bring this tool in, and instead of looking like a loser, I look like a hero.
So after sending dozens of emails and DMs, I'm really happy to welcome today's guest, Jacob, who is the CEO of RevenueCat. Jacob recently announced a very interesting acquisition. They didn't buy a dev tool. They actually bought one of their customers.
It was like, it's a big app with like over 100,000 subscribers and like used RevenueCat from the beginning, had like all this stuff. And I was like, that would actually be very, very valuable to us.
I'll leave you in suspense about exactly what this mobile app is, but trust me, it's pretty interesting. Okay, if you're not a mobile dev, let me set the scene. You might think of mobile apps as being like Duolingo, Spotify, Headspace, all these sorts of things. You might not realize how big it is. It's a $150 billion a year market right now, just for in-app purchases. And you might also be thinking, hey, like, you know, like purchases, like sounds like Stripe. Is it just like Stripe of mobile development? It's not really like Stripe. The biggest difference from mobile that I remember is that it's like you just have many types of subscriptions. You're constantly experimenting. You might let people pay weekly, pay monthly, pay annually, pay like every 3 months. We did all of these things. We tested them all out, and you have to like maintain that and make sure like people have the right access after all these years. You might do trials where it's like free, first 7 days are free, first month is free, or you might do like discounts and like special offers. You might just change the pricing completely. And you've got to keep all these things in sync. You've got to make sure people have the right access. You've got to make sure it works on like Google Play, on Apple, plus people that just buy it like with Stripe on your website as well. We had that. And it's just very confusing. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of context as to why this actually matters. Let's go.
You know, RevenueCat has gotten further and further away from the core problem. I mean, we still solve the core problem really well, but like the last couple of years, we've been building at a much higher level in the stack. But the core, for folks that aren't familiar with the space, is like, if you sell anything digital on the app stores, being the Google Play Store and App Store specifically are the two biggest, you're sort of forced to use Apple's in-app purchase payment providers and our payment system and Google's, and they provide a lot of value for customers because they, you know, developers, they're a merchant of record, so you can sell in 200 countries or something like that instantly. You don't have to worry about tax stuff. You get a lot of protections against like credit card fraud and things like this. They take a good cut. They take like 30%. And like, that's not even the hard part, the worst part. The worst part is just the APIs are kind of clunky. They always have been. Apple and Google have made progress, but you know, they're Google may be slightly better as an API company, but I don't think Apple would have ever set, you know, outside of their, you know, the mobile SDKs themselves, I think, are still pretty good. That's like their legacy from acquiring Next Step and that whole origin story for most of mobile at Apple. But their APIs has never been their strong suit, so they're just kind of hard to use. They don't really match what's, I think, considered industry good. And you know, that's kind of where we step in, is we put this layer on top and make it easier and let developers focus on the actual interesting parts of commercialization, which you were just mentioning, is like, how much should I charge? And like all of these things, you know, because the faster you can make changes, experiment, run your business, you know, the more successful you'll be. So that's what our mission is help developers make more money by making all like the hard stuff easy. So.
This episode is brought to you by WorkOS. If you're building a dev tool, at some point, your customers are going to start asking you for enterprise features. WorkOS offers you single sign-on, skim provisioning, and audit logs out the box. WorkOS is trusted by Perplexity and Vercel, as well as Workbrew, a homebrew management startup that I recently interviewed. I just told Mike that WorkOS is the sponsor, and this is what Mike said.
Yeah, so WorkOS isn't paying me any money for this. I pay WorkOS money for this, but WorkOS is like one of the best developer tools I've like ever used. It's the documentation and the experience with building with them is so good. Like I initially was almost like, okay, this seems expensive, but then I built an integration with them in about 20 minutes that I had spent 2 days banging my head off the wall trying to build it directly with Okta. And then with WorkOS, I then have like many SSO providers like supported instead of just one. So yeah, like for me, WorkOS is one of the nicest developer experiences I've encountered in the last like 5 years, probably. And it's not surprising because a bunch of the developer team are ex-GitHub and therefore very good at their job.
Go to workos.com to learn more. Yeah, and I think like in mobile, unless people have worked in mobile, it might be hard also to imagine how important this is, because I think like in SaaS, like typically you might like review your pricing like once a year, or like just like, you know, have an offer like at Black Friday at most, and that's very rare probably.
Yeah, we don't. The number of times we've touched our own pricing is I can count on one hand in 7 years, right? Versus like a customer, and the reason for that is, well, one, there's just, it's kind of thinner margins. I like to say our customers are not literal margins, but our customers are low ACV. So meaning, you know, our customers, let's say these businesses that we serve, they're relatively low ACV. So usually less than $100 in annual contract value, ACV. Relatively high churn. So consumers it's a churn challenge business. There's a lot of turnover, and relatively high gross margins though. So like you're selling digital goods, which are generally infinitely replicable. So you almost have zero gross margins, or zero marginal costs, sorry. And so that creates just kind of like an interesting difference from what most of SaaS is, which is generally high ACV, generally reasonable churn or low churn, and also good gross margins. So they're different businesses. And for consumer, so you really want to optimize your price point, your conversions. You know, you're getting hundreds of at-bats a day for customers. You can do programmatic price experimentation and stuff because you have so many customers coming in all the time. Customer support is a different thing than in B2B SaaS, because, you know, you have, again, thousands and thousands of customers, which like a big SaaS company might only have thousands or tens of thousands of customers. Is very it's not very uncommon for a subscription app to have hundreds of thousands of subscribers. And that just dictates an entirely different type of business. And I guess that's, you know, we serve that vertical. It requires a different set of tooling, a sort of different set of skills and stuff. And, you know, that's been our niche. But yeah, you're right. Like not nobody, but it's rare for people who haven't worked in this space to really understand it. I had this funny anecdote from the early days where I was always able to sell RevenueCat much more easily to somebody who actually knew how to build RevenueCat. So like somebody who had done it before was always like 10 times easier a sale. And we have this like internal motto. They always come back. We'll get the tire kicker come by who's like entering in up subscriptions for the first time, and they're, you know, the developers. I'm one too, like always overconfident, right? You're a good computer person. That's how you got here. And you're like, how hard can it be? It's just JSON, right? And then you're like, it's not that hard. It's just going to be time consuming and annoying. And when you get it wrong, your company's going to lose money, and it's fine. And then, you know, they don't always come back, but very often they come back like 6-9 months later, and they're like, yeah, actually this sucks. And so, you know, which kind of also plays into our patience as a marketing or go-to-market tactic is not be too aggressive, because we know the complexity of the problem is enough that eventually they will have a need for us. So
yeah, and it felt like as well that at least in my team, it wasn't just the developers that were kind of involved in RevenueCat. It was very much like the rest of the team was very aware of RevenueCat, and it was like it I don't know like how much it is like is it probably a lot of like the marketing team, the founders, the execs get involved in RevenueCat. So
I'll give that like sort of like accidental credit, and it's actually been something that's been a bit awkward as we've gotten bigger, because, you know, me and my co-founder we're both developers, and we've kind of always stylized RevenueCat as a developer-led company and a developer-first company. I've tried to expand the definition of developer rather than change us from being a developer-oriented company. But I also realize, when I say developer, I think of, you know, when I worked at Elevate, which is a mobile subscription app before this, you know, my boss was a designer, CEO was a designer. we had product people, we had game designers, we had all kinds of folks. And I'm like, these are all developers in my mind. Like we're all working on a software product, right? The only people that you might not put in that category is like maybe somebody in ops or finance or something like this, but like, who cares? Like throw them in the bucket and we can think about people who make software as, humans that make software for other humans. That's a developer to me. That's also just cope for me not wanting to redo a whole bunch of swag and change our mission statement. But I've tried to expand it, but you're right. Like, and this is, I think, maybe there's a lesson in here for other DevTools founders, which is like, I think the more like obviously there's good benefits to a dev tool that's just like in the engine room and the engineers love it and they plug it in and it never gets thought about again. But there's been a lot of advantages to us, even though it's been somewhat difficult, that the developers love us. That's a must. You got to have that. But then it's great that the customer support team uses RevenueCat too. And the founders of the company are often on RevenueCat looking at their stuff on a daily basis, and the data teams and often the product teams. And like as the company scales, more and more stakeholders use RevenueCat. Now that's really hard because the magic of RevenueCat was this developer experience that we really focused on, and that doesn't necessarily translate. So like we're a great product for developers and maybe a mediocre product for, some of those other personas. I think you have to be great for one of those personas first.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the stage we're in now is like, okay, how do we catch up on all these marketers? Also is a huge growth marketer, is a huge, persona for us. And so we're kind of in the stage now where we're like catching up and retranslating some of the products so that it talks to all of this, but it's hard. It's hard to talk to, 5 different personas in a product and not have it come off super like wacky. Right. So yeah.
Yeah. It seemed like you had a good, even when, so maybe this is just, this is going to put RevenueCat in a very good light, but yeah, like I was saying, that you're the person that I've been inviting onto the podcast for the longest time. And I think it was like, because it really was like one of those like kind of magic tools in the sense when I was working there, but where my kind of manager was like tasked with setting up all the in-app subscription stuff. And because when I joined, they didn't actually have it. It was like, it was all free. And then suddenly we were doing this and it was just this massive project. So he was like, just taking way too long on it. And then discovered RevenueCat. And then, it was like, he did it. He loved it. Shout out Jesse, legendary guy.
It is a magic moment when you can make a developer look like a genius, right? Or look like a hero.
Yeah.
And I think our product's not perfect. It's still not perfect. It never will be. But like, when you can relieve a ton of effort for a developer and take what could be, I think part of the sell, and I think this is like for people ideating on like new DevTools projects, I think any problem in computer science or computers or whatever that seems at the outside, it should be simple, but it's not, is a really good opportunity. More so than there are complex problems that are obviously complex problems, and those are good to work on too. But I think there's a special thing in this one. It's harder than you think it should be. Because, and the reason, it's a psychological reason, I think, is that it actually brings kind of a lot of shame when a developer can't do it, right? And they have to like explain to non-technical people, like, they're like, why Apple gives you some non-technical CEO person who's like, I just go, but there's a website for it. It's easy. And so I think we get a lot of developer love just by, avoiding that experience for developers and being like, okay, rather than, they've heard the horror stories, and they know like, okay, we can just click and bring this tool in, and instead of looking like a loser, I look like a hero. And I think that's a super powerful moment, like magic, like you said, just it kind of magically solves the problem, which is great.
Yeah. I was talking to one of my friends from when I worked there, Rosie, to try and get like good question ideas as well. And she's a growth marketer. And her question was like, how did you figure out how this was even like a possible product to build? Because it's like the sort of thing that you almost think like, okay, that's Apple and Google's domain. Like this sucks. Like it's always going to suck to build it. Like it seems like it's actually quite a complex product, even though, saying it's maybe seems simple, but it's
a compounded set of very simple things, right? It's an emergent complexity in the system. But yeah, I mean the simple truth is like I was in, build for yourself. I worked at this company called Elevate just for like, story time, but like we built this app called Elevate in like 2013 or 14, right when the App Store was like allowing in-app purchases, subscriptions. They had them for a couple of years, but they were only allowed for like news apps, and Apple is very restrictive. And at some point in 2013 or 14, they were like, hey, you can now, anybody who has any sort of like recurring content, basically SaaS, they were like, you can do subscriptions for apps now, which was a big change. It was just an App Store, review policy change. And so we very quickly switched our product over to being subscription based, not really knowing a whole lot about it. And then sort of two things happened. We did that. And then right after we got featured, just back when Apple did like an app of the year, big push, they would pick one app and make it app of the year. It was literally like 4 weeks after we pushed subscriptions into production, we got made app of the year. And we learned all the reasons our in-app subscription system was not very good, right? Very, very quickly. And yes, we got like, Miguel and I, we worked on this together, my co-founder, we got a good 2 years, we've been working on that business, but then we were involved, and we weren't just involved on the engineering side. We were doing some growth stuff. We were doing some product engineering. We were doing and you can see that in RevenueCat's product. It very much like maps to kind of how we were thinking as a, medium-sized app company at the time, and kind of like what makes it hard is the confluence of all these problems. It's like growth, and it's, the infrastructure, and it's the data problems, and sort of the commerce stuff. And I didn't, and I think that actually is what made it very difficult initially to pitch RevenueCat, especially to investors, because like they did not really understand, like you said, if you didn't know the problem, you didn't know the problem. A few investors who I talked to who had worked in subscriptions were like, yes, all of my subscription companies have garbage data because it's really hard.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it really just evolved out of our own experience and being sort of like, wearing many hats at previous startups. And, by definition, most startups are small, right? Like, but by numbers, right? There are big startups, but most startups are small, which means most people need tools that can kind of do a lot of different things. They can't buy like a point solution for everything at the beginning. And so I think that's one of our superpowers is like, we just give you a lot of pretty good stuff out of the box for this kind, for this one vertical specific kind of business.
Yeah. And it seems like now you've got pricing experiments. But when I was using RevenueCat in my mobile app days, you didn't, I don't think, have it, or it was in beta, but you had this like incredibly comprehensive article on running experiments. And it wasn't just like one of those articles that like you read, it was and just like, oh, cool. It was like we were referencing it like the entire time. Like it was like everyone.
Are you talking? It was like something I published in like 2020 or 2021, maybe.
It was like I think you wrote it. I'm 90% sure you wrote it. And it was like just like how to like. I don't think it was like how to do it in RevenueCat. It was more just like the statistics behind like running pricing experiments and stuff like that. And
yeah, this has been, and there's a whole story behind scaling a company, and that was sort of like one of the last technical projects I was able to own as we were scaling. It's from an internal like logistics perspective, like to code. And I'm gonna tell you, all the technical founders or people want to be founders out there. Like if you're a computer person, you really, really, really love computers, don't start a company because you're going to not do computers anymore eventually. Like that is just what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that was like my last hurrah. And there was, again, going back to like we had built price A/B testing in the past, and like I knew what things worked and what things bit us, and like the specifics on mobile, because you're not drawing for a website, you're not loading pages from a website. The environment's a little less controlled and has some like there's weird things that can happen in an A/B test on mobile because of like connectivity issues that don't exist on, so sometimes some of the other like A/B testing tools, I'm sure they have addressed now, but would create like weird systematic errors and stuff like this. And then I was super obsessed, and I still am super obsessed with like Bayesian modeling. So, joint analysis, because basically everybody in experimental analysis basically just uses frequentist style binomial calculations. Did A convert? Basically, did more events happen on the A branch or the B branch? But that doesn't work for pricing, because pricing,
it's about profit and stuff.
There's multiple steps in the conversion funnel, and then on the end of that, there's like a scaling factor, which is like the price, and then often in subscriptions it's even more difficult because then there's a potentially infinite number of continuing conversion events beyond that. And you can't just use binomial like conversion. You can as like a first order.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, that was an interesting one because we launched that beta and then it kind of like hobbled for a long time because we didn't have the team built up to really address it well. And then in the last year, we finally were able to start to really invest in it. And we've got big plans to, and we didn't end up, we're no longer using my beautiful Bayesian model. That's going to be something I regret the rest of my life. But yeah, I mean, I think something you hit on there is like just content marketing too. And just how, even if I have to sit here and explain like, yeah, actually that all did not work out and blah, 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 probably I should do a follow-up blog post, but, it's always worked really well for us to overshare with our customers a little bit, right? Like I think it's always helped more than it has harmed. And that's probably a good example.
I think so, because I think like assessing myself, like I think I came away from it, telling the team, hey, like we're just doing this simply, and that's actually probably not right. And like it was like, okay, RevenueCat, I've learned
even if I
something.
can't fix it, at least I can warn you.
Yeah.
Right. Like
yeah, and it's like you kind of are an authority, and we trust you more. Like it's sort of, it feels like it built up like affinity.
People are pretty good at sensing bullshit artists, I think, generally, especially like the best companies. And when you're building something for people where you're going to index into their success, you really don't want to try to bamboozle. Like you really want to be able to get like the companies with the best and smartest people working at them as your customers, because they're going to be the ones that drive the most growth for you. Right. And I think this is why, I don't know, there's such an allergic reaction to a lot of like sales techniques and sort of like mid marketing out there where it's like just not all that creative and not all that interesting. I just think it aggregates kind of a crappy customer base, which then just doesn't scale that well, or at least not as efficiently as I think just like, being very honest with your customers and just that trust and authority. Right. And understanding like the empathy is like two ways, right? So like if I can be empathetic to my customers, which we try to do every day, but then the more I communicate and share, my customers also gain a lot of empathy for us as a vendor. And when things don't always go right, it helps a lot that they know who I am. They've seen my writing, they've seen other people on our team, right? And they know we're humans and that we care, and that we're fallible, right? As well. And so I think that's a poor excuse for screwing things up. I prefer not to screw up ever, but like when there is an issue, it's really helpful to have kind of built that trust with our customers. And when you want to sell them something, the next time I want to sell you something, it's so much easier if you like trust me already, right? Like I don't have to like convince you that A, this product is good, and B, like I'm not a weirdo. Like I've already convinced you that I'm not a weirdo. That's like now you might even try the product, even if you're not convinced, but because you just you trust me, which is a great position to be in.
Yeah, and like let's say like sticking on the pricing experiment thing, it's like you've taught me that this is a really difficult problem, and that it's like if it takes longer to get out there, that my understanding is that's because it's hard to build, and then if it's expensive, it's like, well, I understand because that's not an easy thing to build, and it's taken them a lot of work, and it's like really hard to maintain. So of course it's not going to be cheap. Like it's like this sort of, it feels
We've kind of made it clear the value, by being honest. Like a lot of my early content that resonated, going back to the very beginning of growth. And I think this generally applies to any dev tool that you're starting from scratch. Ideally, you're attacking some domain that's complex in some way, and there's like probably a lack of content on how to do that really well. And if you're the expert in that, just give it away. Like that's what we did. We basically explained how to build RevenueCat. That was our first couple years of content. It was like, here are all the when we started it, very, very beginning, like we pushed out a beta onto Reddit at the end of 2017. And we're just like, trickling in one sign up a week or something like this. Didn't really have much to do because like I didn't know what to build. I didn't have users. So I spent half my time blogging. I literally would like 2.5 days a week, I was like writing long form blog posts that at the time went up on a Medium blog. And I just wrote down like every interesting sort of technical aspect of what, I thought was wrong with StoreKit. What were some of the technical challenges? And then I guess sort of intentionally, unintentionally just thought about like, okay, like how are these going to SEO? And there was a lack of content on this stuff, and it was so niche. That I think ended up being our first, you're always just like trying to grab the next rope. Like, what's the next thing that we're going to get? And that was like probably our first real piece of traction was like, okay, that content started to rank really highly, like right underneath or sometimes above some of the Apple content. And so that was a huge thing. So, I mean, first mover advantage, obviously, but like that was huge for us. And I mean, look, if you're building something net new, that solves a problem that exists, like there better be a search term you can outrank. You know what I mean? Or the idea is probably not it's gonna be too hard to get going. You're not differentiated enough. If you don't think you can bring some content to the table that's gonna outrank, for some, at least a couple like important keywords.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think like you had a really good tone on. I remember I think I said this to you, but like my again, Jesse, he was like really happy because you were going to send him some swag, and then he like forwarded us the email that you'd sent him that was like, he's like, it was like, I still remember it was something like, you get a free t-shirt and I get a free human walking billboard.
Yeah. That card that still goes out, by the way. That exact
really?
copy. Yeah.
Okay. Nice.
That was like, yeah, there's, if you survive long enough, there's just like these random things you get right, and then they just like run forever and just continue to work. But the t-shirt canon, it's called t-shirt.js was the script, my digital t-shirt canon. And then eventually we had, we got a little bit bigger. We hired more engineers. Now it's t-shirt.py, got converted to Python, got to be, standardized. But this was in 2019, maybe 18. And yeah, I met this vendor, that Printfection, that does like, they'll print t-shirts and do fulfillment. And they had like a decent little API, and it was like $15 or $20 to have one of these sent out. So basically I just like with intercom.
I won't tell Jesse, by the way.
Oh yeah. No, that was definitely, I wrote that note by hand.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I was just able with our, basic intercom integration and some syncing scripts, I just wrote a little job that, once you hit your 10th subscriber, so I didn't send it to everybody. So you had to like prove that you were a real human building actual something that got some amount of subscribers, but it was only like 10. Yeah, it would just automatically fire off a fulfillment link and send it to you, let you pick a size. And to this day, I think we've sent thousands of t-shirts, and like I think it's been our most popular product. Free stuff is always like the most popular product you can make. But yeah, it's crazy. You see people, now when I'm at dev events, a lot of times I'll see people in the shirts.
Really?
The red, yeah. I mean, the red becomes sort of iconic because I think of that red that I happened to get for that shirt. But yeah, that was like one of these, really interesting set and forget marketing things. It's so cheap to do. Like once you reach a certain, scale, and kind of like, especially again, it's like if you have good pricing aligned with customer growth, you can spend a lot of money kind of making them feel good, even if it's a loss in the early days, because there'll be a couple winners in there that will help pay for everybody's t-shirts, basically. And it all works out. Yeah. And then the tone is, I don't know. I write weird, and I talk weird, and it's hard to replicate. Like I've had many attempts internally for people to like write in Jacob voice, and it always comes off like uncanny valley of Jacob voice.
Yeah.
So I end up most of the time having to just write. I just tell people, don't even try. Just send me what you want and I will write it. And I should do a Jacob GPT, but like, I don't even think it can't even do it. I don't know why I'm just so unique. I'm the only one that's unreplaceable by AI, but AI, all these LM tools have like the dorkiest corporate voice you could possibly get by default. Maybe Grok is like the most like casual kind of, but even that, it's like super kind of, I don't know. You can just tell I'm talking to, a computer. So we'll see if that ever gets fixed and I can finally retire.
Yeah. Do you think there's any like advice? I mean, not to like replicate Jacob, but like advice to other DevTools founders to kind of be a bit more like, have more personality.
Well,
maybe
not
maybe I won't
sure.
say that to anyone specifically that they should have more
I think
personality.
anybody who's worked with me pre and post the company would probably tell you this wasn't something I developed while running RevenueCat. So I was unhireable, Jack. I was, I was fundamental. Like I couldn't
Yeah.
work for people.
You had to start a company or you'd be out on the street. It's just
Yeah. Basically, I was like, I worked for I had great bosses, I had great jobs, and I hated them all, and I was just like a total rake to all of them. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's bad. Well, this comes down to maybe founding team composition. If you're a dev who wants to start a technical company and if you don't like being on stage, if you can't make people laugh, if you're like not quote unquote charismatic, I mean, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. And like, there's different forms of charisma. Like, I don't know if you've ever talked to or seen Miguel, my co-founder, talk. Like, he's very charismatic as well, but in a very different way. And I think as a founder, if you get any sort of scale, like there are occasionally like founders who one member of the founding team who stays very quiet and is, maybe fits an architect role, but like if you're going to scale anything, you're going to become an exec, and execs kind of have to have like, Shooter McGavin gun fingers and like all that stuff. Like if you want to be successful, I mean, you talk to a lot of people, you got to do a lot of stakeholder alignment all day, you know what I mean? So like, and then, obviously for sales too, it helps to be able to talk. And then I say charismatic, like it's, maybe sort of a bad thing, but you just got to be comfortable with people. And it helps if you're, verbally quick on your feet. But if you're smart enough to do computers, you're probably smart enough to write quickly and think quickly as well. But yeah, I did a lot of theater and stuff as a kid. Like I've done, been making jokes on the internet in one form or another for like 25 years. So like, I'm just applying it to a unique sort of form at this point. But yeah, have a theater kid in your founding team is my advice maybe.
Who knows computers? That's
gotta be more. That's gotta be actually a pretty decent overlap, I would think. So
yeah. Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah. Write to us. Yeah. And actually, so one thing I really wanted to talk about is like, so the startup that I was working at was sort of how do we two devs on the podcast say this?
Spicy audio content.
Spicy. Okay, you said okay, yeah. So well, the startup I was working at was maybe slightly different. It was like kind of they positioned themselves as like sexual well-being for women with like content, some of which was spicy, some of which was like meditation, but it was broadly in the same category of a company that you just bought.
Yeah, about as far as they'll let you take it on the App Store. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So you recently bought an app, Dipsy. Yeah, which is.
Do you want the insider story, or do you want to tell? Tell us what it is, Jack. Give me the pitch.
Okay, so it's like 50 Shades of Grey in app form.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I think it's pretty good. I think Faye and me as a member of the holding company for Dipsy, we like people probably a little bit better than 50 Shades of Grey. But but yeah, basically it's spicy audio content that loosely competes with the traditional like romance audiobook space, or not audiobook even, but like the romance novel space. And yeah, we're talking in the beginning of 25. This was in 2024. It was our first acquisition. And yeah, it's kind of interesting from a bunch of perspectives.
Yeah.
Like, and we can talk about any, but I mean, one is that, we acquired essentially was a customer of ours. And there was a couple of driving reasons for that. And then of course, like the subject matter itself is kind of interesting and sort of unexpected for a DevTools company to start, getting into the spicy audiobook space. I'll say that was more serendipity than it was intentional.
Yeah.
For sure. It wasn't on my roadmap, but we were talking about before, it's like the most entertaining outcomes are often the best. So I was like, this is good. It's entertaining. It's memorable. I bet if I had bought like some random fitness app, nobody would be asking me about it on a podcast probably, or at least we wouldn't be laughing about it. And so yeah, I mean, the story behind it, Dipsy, the founder of Dipsy, Faye Keegan, she was a very, very early customer of ours, and somebody had given us product feed very early, like 2018, like one of the first 100 customers or something like this. And one of the first like venture-backed real apps using RevenueCat. And so I'd given it was very opinionated. She'd given a ton of feedback over the years, and we had developed sort of like a good relationship just on RevenueCat and how it can help them, and learning from her product and her team and all this stuff. And so yeah, last year when it kind of a bunch of things aligned is that I really needed somebody like Faye on my team to help us, grow and scale RevenueCat. She has a bunch of really great ideas about what we're going to do to expand sort of what RevenueCat does and is. And then also, we kind of had this need that I hadn't been shopping, but like we have this need, and I'm sure a lot of companies in DevTools space run into this. It's like, you can ask customers to test stuff. You can test stuff yourself, but like there's a lot of changes that have very little benefit to the customer. And they're, they might be just like efficiency updates, like they can be big risky changes that happen in the back end and maybe don't provide any like immediate benefit. How do you get a customer to test that? You either just throw them in a test pool without asking, which is like maybe fine, but like has risk. But then there's also stuff that's like, maybe it's user facing, or maybe it's like, and we've constantly struggled with like, okay, we've rewritten some aspect of some subsystem of in-app subscription somewhere. And it's like, okay, can we go find a customer that will let us like turn this feature flag on? And it's like, if you don't bring them something like, hey, we're going to make you more money in some way, they're just like, why would I like, risk my, And so I was like, well, it might actually be helpful. We have a lot of RevenueCat employees, team members have apps of their own, which we actually use a lot, like sort of like, there's no official agreements, but like sort of under the table, it's always like, hey, is anybody willing to like make their app the guinea pig for this new thing? Yeah. And often somebody is, because a lot of these are like side projects, like things people aren't like, relying on. But because of that, they're also like tend to be smaller scale, right? So they tend to be like tens or hundreds of subscribers, and there's just certain things that happen at the scale of thousands or hundreds of thousands of subscribers that you don't see at 10 or 100, and cross-platform and whatever. So Dipsy fit all those needs. It was like it's a big app with like hundreds of thousands of subscribers, over 100,000 subscribers, and like and used RevenueCat from the beginning, had like all this stuff, and I was like that would actually be very, very valuable to us. And I think being involved in firsthand in operating a customer company, especially since our niche is pretty narrow, right? Like, we were talking about Postlog before, which is another great company friend of mine, James, but like, they might have a harder time because they can serve a much broader set of horizontal products. Like they can serve many, their customers are probably more varied than ours in what they look like. Our customers all are there's a variance, but like probably look more similar than most vertical SaaSes do, which is an advantage.
I think so. Mobile apps tend to be pretty similar. How they operate, what matters, what moves the needle.
Yeah, a lot of the same physics. Obviously, exactly what the content is different, but like the physics of the business are often very similar. So it's been very informative for us, and especially as we're like launching new things and testing new things and stuff that we're getting more ambitious and sort of risk taking with what we build. And so having an app that's at scale is certainly been helpful and insightful. And like we have a first, and Dipsy, the Dipsy team operates sort of as an independent subsidiary, and we have a Slack bridge with them, and like we can ask questions that we would normally feel maybe uncomfortable asking a customer, and stuff like that. So yeah, it's been overall pretty interesting, pretty good. Just glad to have have something funny and good. We did a small fundraise this year. I was like, we should probably do an acquisition too. It's kind of how I plan my years. I'm just like, what is the funny stuff I can stuff into the like end of year update, and just work backwards from there.
So you said you like asked them kind of stuff like what kind of things have been like, are there any things that you could say like, oh, okay, yeah, we just wouldn't have figured that out if it wasn't for having like a kind of.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it will come into like, Google's like, oh, we're gonna enable this thing, and we need maybe it requires a customer to enable it for us to even see how it works. And so we'll just go like, hey, Dipsy, can you guys flip this on real quick? And then we'll boom, instantly we've got data. And that was hard before. We'd have to kind of like wait, especially experimental new stuff. Like Apple and Google are always adding new offer whatever things at the margins, and we build for it, but often there's the chicken and egg problem where a lot of our customers won't try that stuff until we make it easy, but we can't really make it easy until like we've really tested it. And it doesn't have often a lot of pull from customers anyway, because the Google and Apple build too good of stuff on this. I don't know. But so having that ability to just go and like flip things on has been really helpful. Any sort of anomalies too has been nice. Like there's always anomalies. Like like Google will subtly change things, and like we can, we have limited visibility. This is like a mobile dev challenge. This is a challenge I think probably for anybody building a dev tool that isn't purely an API. So if you're like an APM company, anybody who's like deploying bits into somebody else's environment, which is like, RevenueCat has an SDK, so that goes into the other app. There's like a limited visibility that you can get, like what's going on in that runtime, exactly. And so now having our own first party, like we can actually introspect into that runtime if we need to, and get logs, and and do that much faster than we do in like a customer. They'll wait for a customer to report it, and then we have to ask for logs, and now we can jump in at a code level without having to like go back and forth and do a screen share and all that stuff. And it sped a lot of things up. But definitely an interesting bet. Like I had to, there's a lot of like trust me's that had to go on for this to go through. But overall 6 months in or so, or I guess only 4 months in, there's been a lot of quote unquote synergies. Even quite a few I didn't expect. So that's been good.
That's cool. Was there any like precedent to it, or was it just like because I hadn't heard of anyone doing this before?
So I mean, like AppLovin, if you know them, they're like a mobile ad.
I feel like I know.
Yeah, they bought Adjust, which is like a mobile measurement partner.
Yeah.
They also have a fairly large app portfolio. But they, for different reasons, I think they're actually like using their like advantage as like a market maker in ads and stuff to actually make money. And they've like, I assume, used leverage to buy like fairly large apps. That was never the case for us with Dipsea. And like, I even went out to some of our like competitive companies that use RevenueCat as well, and kind of reassured them like, hey, like we're doing this. I want you to know that like, we're not going to like use any sort of inside information. It's not our goal to like crush you. We're going to let the like Dipsy team keep plugging away. We're going to try stuff and experiment, but like, I fully expect it. I don't expect it to be like, a substantial line item for us more than it is like a strategic asset for us to grow the core business.
Yeah. Would you recommend other DevTools to do this as well?
I think you need excuses to use your product. Because I think one thing and this is a couple things that have happened in the last year that have gotten me back closer to the product. Because what happens is you have some weird niche problem you discover.
Yeah.
And then you build a thing because you know a lot about it. And then you spend the next decade building a company and not working on that thing. Yeah. Because like building a company is hard. It's harder than most computer systems. It's time consuming. You're not as good at it as you were at the like computer thing you started at. So you have a lot of learning to do. And it's just really hard to like also stay close to your product every day. So you have to kind of force it. And like, and there's a lot of like well-intentioned, terrible advice out there from a lot of like people in the venture class and whatever, that'll be like, oh, you need to factor yourself out and like, you need to delegate. It's like, to a degree, yes, but like your product and who you're selling to is like the only thing that matters really. Everything else is like efficiencies and scaling and like bits and bobs. Like every other team around you kind of care about everybody, right? Yeah. But like some of these things like product and delivery to who consumes it, like, and what you're building, that's the core. Without that, everything else collapses.
Lifeblood.
Yeah, without that, you're just a financial instrument. And so you can't, I don't think founders can lose it. It doesn't have to necessarily be the CEO, but like I think founders can't lose that. And like it got really hard to keep up and like spend enough time with the product. So a couple things. So yeah, I think every dev tool, you need some, if I think James was talking about, like Posthog uses Posthog, right? Like that's great. Like if you can use your product on your product, that's ideal.
He puts Posthog in the logo, I think on the logo cloud of like,
what they use. Yeah,
trusted
that's
by.
Really cheeky. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. I've been meaning to do this. We actually probably could. It's just like one of these things where like we're not, they're fortunate that they're an ICP for themselves, which is like, has some real advantages. We are not. Like I could probably shove RevenueCat's data into RevenueCat, but like it would probably not
do like Dipsy by RevenueCat or something. Right?
Yeah, well, but that's the thing. So two things that happened this year. One is like, we acquired Dipsy. I got put in, now I have Dipsy's data on my dashboard. I look at every day because like I can, we have the ability to jump into a customer's page and like see their stuff, but it's like something that gets audited and it's not something you do unless you have a reason. Because it's just like, we kind of want to keep that tight. And so I would not be able to really see how the product was functioning very easily. And so now I'm a permanent collaborator on this big app, and I can see what the experience is like for them. We also launched our own mobile app this year, and I worked on that project a lot. So, and seeing Dipsy's data in our mobile app has just brought me a lot closer to the product. And I think and this is just more internal stuff, but we also this past year started doing internal shipping reviews where Miguel and I are sitting with the heads of the little teamlets that we have around the company that are working on different projects, and we're just meeting with them on a monthly basis just to be hey, what are you building? Can we help? What are we building next? How's it going? And just spending more time doing product rather than building company stuff, company logistics. And I think you have to be intentional, because I think that stuff just gets squeezed out if you're not intentional about making time for it. So I'm very happy with where I'm at the end of this year. So I'm spending a lot more time with the product than I think I was a year ago. And it just, everything gets better because you just notice, you're just the person who's allowed to complain about everything. And so when there's something stupid, I could just be this is dumb. We should fix this. And everybody's you know what? Yeah, that's a great idea, sir. And then it gets done, right? There's the weird power age symmetries at a company, but I think it's not. I think it's beneficial when the CEO's using the stuff, and I can call out.
Yeah.
There's often this activation energy for problems that little problems that are annoying, but they're not existential. It takes the CEO or somebody, or your biggest. It takes somebody, quote unquote, with clout or important to make it a thing, or these little things just don't get fixed. It's really interesting. And I actually think the when you add all those things up, that's how products get really crappy. It's this, it's never one bad decision. It's a collection of small neglects around the entire business and product. So figuring out how to get that into the DNA of the company is an interesting challenge. How do you make everybody, pick up the trash or fix the broken windows all the time? I think is a challenge.
And it's because you're the one that directs a lot of the stuff. If you have out of date taste on what is needed or something as the founder, it's
oh yeah,
gonna go badly.
Terrible.
That's kind of, you're keeping your taste up to date sort of thing. Of
you end up delegating more, which isn't necessarily bad. But then I think I think as long as your timeline with the company is very long, you're probably going to outlive most of the people that report to you and most people that work at the company. If I'm not physically human outlive, but outlive in terms of life at the company, right? And so as long as you have that long-term mindset, it's super important that you continue to remain this person who's collecting a lot of information and stories and lessons. And of course it's good to get in writing, and it's good to spread that out and stuff like that. But just kind of assume, anything you delegate is going to come back to you at some point. Right. And so you have to stay sharp, on all these things. So
yeah, very, very cool. I realize we're actually running out of time, Jacob. So we can do a wrap up. If that's,
let's do it, Jack. We waited this long. Okay.
Yeah,
it's only been 3 years, I think, that you've been trying to get me on the pod or something like this. So
hounding you.
Yeah.
So if we have the rapid fire of advice, big takeaway for DevTools founders, and DevTool that you're excited about that isn't RevenueCat.
Okay, hit me one at a time. What was the first one?
Okay, what's your big takeaway for DevTools founders listening?
Just have fun. I think just try to have fun. I mean, I don't know. I think especially, Miguel and I always say to each other, "Do you want to have fun or do you want to win?" That's something. No. Sorry, I said it wrong. It's do you want to be happy or do you want to win? That's kind of what we say to each other when things get hard. Do you want to be happy or do you want to win? And
what's the answer?
I don't know if there's an answer. It's a question you have to ask yourself, right? And because it's never, I woke up we had server alarms at 1 a.m. last night, and here I am on the 8th year of RevenueCat. I broke my foot, so I jumped across to my office without my crutches to get here.
To restart some servers.
Yeah, exactly. I actually can't do anything, but I still like to be there. And if I can update a status page or respond to a customer or something like that, I want to be there when we have a Sev 1.
Yeah.
And that's 8 years in. I expect to do that for another 8 years. So to some level, there's always going to be a thing that gets you out of bed in the morning. gets you out of bed in the morning, gets you out of bed at 1 a.m. right? And so yeah, and those are the moments where you're like, is this making me happy? It's like, not really, but do I want to win? Yeah, winning does make me happy. So like, let's remember that. And so yeah, I mean, just maybe the meta advice there is just figure out what your like meta motivational thing is. Like, figure out why you're doing it, right? And make sure you have a good reason. Especially once you get past that like early killing zone and you get something that's kind of working. Because then I really think the thing that causes people not to go long is just burning out, getting bored, falling out of love with the product. So like it is in your investors, customers, employees' best interest that you do a little bit of engineering to prevent that from happening. And you can do that a ton of different ways. But you shouldn't ignore that, because it will, like, I don't know if anybody's done a study on this, but when founders leave companies, it's generally not a bullish signal, right? It's generally a bearish signal. And so like, if you can prevent that from happening, I think that's a good thing.
Have fun.
Yeah.
And then very last question. Any dev tools that you're excited about?
Oh, Rootly is one we've
really?
been using. Yeah, I don't know if you've had them on the podcast, but
I haven't. But I should.
So it's incident. Just talking about incidents, but like we've had them, using them lightly for about 2 years, but in the last year, it's a, I don't want to call it a simple tool, but it's a fairly simple tool. It plugs into Slack, integrates with like most of your DevOps things. And we had this problem where like anytime there would be a thing, like it could be the servers are down. It could be as small as like a customer has a confusing issue that's hitting a bunch of different surface areas. And like, we're having a hard time tracking it across the company. It's in support, it's in here, it's whatever. It's on Twitter. And Rootly just is this really great tool. Like you type /new incident, creates an incident, it notifies a bunch of people. It's very configurable. Oh, but the I don't think we make fewer mistakes now. I don't think there's less stuff. I actually, one thing, we looked at how many incidents we've been declaring, and it's been going up every month. And it's actually a good thing. It's like, we're just using incidents as this like mindset of like, okay, something is happening. And I think in DevTools, like incident response and infrastructure is like probably one of the biggest behind the scenes challenges. And so, yeah, it's been an awesome tool for that. And they're another YC company, I think a couple of years after us. But we've been super happy with that product, and it's changed a lot of the ways that we worked. So amazing.
And then is there anything that you want to shout out? RevenueCat hiring?
Yeah, obviously we're we went through a year and a half of kind of like slower hiring as we were sort of like finding our footing post ZERP and all of this stuff. And I'll say footing found. And now we have a pretty aggressive hiring plan for this coming year. We're always looking for engineers of all sorts. So like, hit me up, or look at our site, and if there's nothing on there that looks obvious, just ping me. Like, we probably have stuff coming over the horizon. And then, also like, if you're a founder type person, I'm always like looking for people who are, maybe wanting to, join the Navy relative Navy a little bit. So hit me up too, because I think like, the more I can make RevenueCat like a collection of entrepreneurial minds and technical builders and stuff like this, I think that will scale quite well as we get bigger. So yeah, let me know.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Jacob, and thanks everyone for listening.